The wind crawled low across the Texas basin like a wounded animal, dry and aching. Dust swirled in lazy spirals, catching the last glow of dusk and casting long, brittle shadows against the scorched land. Nothing moved except for the vultures overhead and the faint shimmer of heat rising off the rocks. Nothing until a figure appeared on the horizon, small, hunched, moving with the caution of a man who no longer trusted the ground beneath him. At the edge of that empty land stood a farmhouse built of weather-worn pine and stubbornness. Its paint had long since surrendered to the sun, and its windows bore the faint fog of unspoken years. Inside, Mae Harland stood at the stove, her hands wrist-deep in flour, baking because she didn't know what else to do. It was her habit when the wind blew from the east, when she felt the ghost of her husband pass through the broken screen door and settle in the corners like a sigh. She glanced through the cracked glass and froze. A man was walking up the path, his boots kicking up bone-dry earth, coat flapping loose behind him like wings gone wrong. He didn't hurry. That scared her more than if he had. She wiped her hands on a towel and reached for the old rifle propped behind the door. She hadn't used it since Eli died, but it was loaded. Always was. The stranger stopped just short of the porch. "I ain't here to cause trouble," he said, voice low and worn like boot leather. "Just need water. Maybe shade if you got a scrap to spare." Mae didn't answer. Not yet. She studied him, the dust on his hat, the way his eyes moved slow but never stopped moving. He was lean, with a scar that slashed through the beard on his jaw. Not a bandit, not exactly, but not clean either. He wore trouble like a second skin. "Name?" she asked. He hesitated. "Wes Calder." She tilted her chin. "Where you from?" "Know where I'm going back to." That earned him nothing, but she stepped back and nodded toward the well. "Help yourself. Bucket's already there." Wes nodded once, removed his hat, and moved to the well. Mae didn't lower the rifle. Not until he drank. When he returned, he stood at the porch edge again. Didn't ask to come up. Just looked at her for a long beat. "You're alone out here." She didn't confirm it. "You shouldn't be." "That a threat?" "No," he said. "It's a fact." The wind rose then, hard and dry. It slapped the screen door and pulled grit across the floor. Mae turned slightly, watching the horizon darken with the weight of a storm, or worse. "You best keep moving," she said. "Nothing good ever lingers too long in this place." Wes nodded slowly. "Then I reckon I'll just keep moving slow." He turned, but before he could take another step, a sharp cry rang out. Not human, not distant either. Mae and Wes turned at the same time, just as the sound came again, closer now. A horse, limping. Seconds later, it emerged from behind the ridge, its rider slumped and barely holding on. Blood streaked the animal's flank. The rider's head lolled like a broken puppet. Mae's breath caught. The horse stumbled and fell to its knees just yards from a porch. The rider tumbled to the ground in a heap. Wes ran forward, kneeling. "He's just a boy," Wes muttered. Mae joined him, kneeling on the dirt beside the child. 10, maybe 11. Brown skin, painted face streaked with dried blood and sweat. Comanche. Mae's got twisted. "This ain't good," she whispered. Wes looked up at her. "He's alive. That might be worse." She saw it in the boy's hand. A strip of woven red cloth clutched like a lifeline. Mae stood abruptly. "Bring him in." "You sure?" Wes asked, rising slowly. "No, but if he dies out here, that'll be on me. I won't carry that weight again." They carried the boy inside, laid him on the table. Mae lit a lantern and drew the curtains. The wind howled outside like it knew something was about to change. She didn't know it yet, but she'd just lit a fire too big to contain. The cabin's light flickered like a heartbeat, soft and uncertain. Wes stood at the boy's side while Mae worked in silence, sleeves rolled, hands steady, jaw locked tight. She hadn't spoken a word since dragging the iron kettle onto the stove and dousing her sewing needle in whiskey. The boy's chest rose shallow and uneven. His leg was torn badly, grazed by something sharp, maybe shot, maybe a jagged rock. Hard to tell through the crusted blood and grit. What Mae did know was that infection had already set in. "How long you figure he's been out there?" Wes asked, his voice hushed. Mae didn't answer at first. She'd already ripped the boy's trousers and peeled back layers of torn cloth. A bullet had grazed his thigh and nicked the bone. His skin was hot to the touch. "Fever. Long enough to make it worse," she finally muttered. "We've got hours. Maybe less." She pulled a rag from the basin and pressed it gently to the wound. The boy winced in his sleep, if it could be called sleep. It was more like drifting, like his body was waiting to decide whether to stay or slip away. Mae met Wes's gaze for the first time since he'd walked onto her land. "You good with pain?" she asked. He blinked. "Mine or his?" "Does it matter?" Wes moved to the fire and took the iron poker from its rack. "No, I suppose it don't." They worked like they'd done this before, not together, but alone in other lives. Wes braced the boy's shoulders while Mae cleaned the wound. The boy screamed once, high and sharp, before collapsing again into unconsciousness. Mae dug in without hesitation, hands red to the wrist. By the time the sun dipped fully behind the hills, the bleeding had slowed. Mae stitched the wound with clean thread and steady fingers. Her face was stone. "He'll live," she said, voice gravel dry. Wes exhaled slow. "Then what?" Mae glanced toward the shuttered window. "Then we pray the ones looking for him don't burn this place to the ground." Wes's jaw tightened. "You think they'll come?" Mae didn't hesitate. "They always do." She stood and peeled off her blood-soaked apron, folding it neatly before tossing it into the wash bin. Her hands trembled slightly now that it was over. She poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to Wes. He took it, eyes fixed on the boy. "He yours?" "No," she said, "but he's someone's." Wes didn't push. He sipped in silence, and Mae sat across from him, the rifle leaning against the table leg like a third guest in their uneasy supper. Thunder rumbled somewhere far off, low and thoughtful. "He said anything?" Wes asked. "Not a word. Fever's got him. He's young, but strong. He's Comanche." Mae nodded once. "That'll matter to some. Not to me." Wes looked at her then. Really looked. The hardness in her face wasn't bitterness. It was history. Survival etched into skin and bone. He recognized it. Wore the same kind himself. "Who are you, Mae Harland?" he asked softly. She didn't answer. Just drained her mug, stood, and checked the windows one by one. Outside, night thickened, pressing in like a secret trying to be heard. Then came a sound, so faint it could have been imagination. A branch snapping. Wes rose slowly, hand already drifting toward the revolver on the table. Mae moved to the window and peered through the gap in the shutter. Moonlight gleamed off something in the distance. Metal? Bone? She wasn't sure, but the stillness had changed. The kind of stillness that came before horses. "They're here," she whispered. Wes moved to the doorway, checking the rifle. "You sure?" "No," she said, her voice low, but I felt it before. Behind them, the boy stirred. His eyes fluttered open, glazed and heavy, but his lips moved. One word. "Father." Mae froze. The boy's voice cracked again. "He's coming." Wes moved like a man trained by silence. He crossed the room and grabbed his revolver, checked the chamber, then turned down the lamp's flame until the glow barely reached the boy's face. Mae stayed at the window, watching the edge of the prairie where moonlight touched the brush. The dust hadn't lifted yet, but her gut twisted like it knew what the earth was about to reveal. The boy stirred again, mumbling in a mix of pain and language neither of them could fully understand. Mae knelt beside him. "What's your name?" she asked gently. He blinked, eyes glassy. "Tiho," he whispered. Mae brushed the hair from his forehead. "Tiho, who's coming? Is it your father?" He nodded weakly. Mae looked at Wes. "That name mean anything to you?" Wes nodded slowly. "It's Comanche. Means coyote. Common name. But if he's the son of who I think he is, then we've got bigger trouble than just a sick child on our hands." Mae narrowed her eyes. "How big?" Wes leaned his shoulder against the wall, his voice tight. "You ever hear of a war chief named Gray Wolf?" Mae's heart skipped. Everyone west of the Pecos has. They say he took on a whole cavalry unit alone once. "They weren't exaggerating," Wes replied. "I saw what was left of that unit." Mae looked back at the boy, who now slept again under the spell of pain and exhaustion. "You think this is his son?" "I think," Wes said, "that if Gray Wolf thinks we hurt his boy, we won't live long enough to explain we didn't." Thunder cracked low again, farther this time, but closer to the ground. The kind that didn't come from clouds. Hoofbeats. Mae turned to the window again. She could see them now. Dark shapes, barely distinguishable, moving with eerie precision across the moonlit flatland. A slow, steady advance. No torches. No banners. No sound but the earth answering their weight. Wes lifted his rifle, aimed out the window, then lowered it again with a sigh. 50, maybe more. Mae didn't blink. They're not charging. No, he said. They're surrounding. Mae locked the front door out of habit, then laughed bitterly at the foolishness of it. You ever think we should have just turned him away? Too late for that now, Wes muttered. Then came the voice, deep, commanding, from just outside the cabin walls. We come for the child. Mae froze. Wes didn't move. The voice spoke again. You sheltered him. He lives because of you. For that, we owe a moment of words before anything else. Mae looked at Wes. What does that mean? It means they're offering a chance to explain before they take judgment into their own hands. Mae took a breath. Then I'll speak. Before Wes could stop her, Mae opened the door. The sight hit her like thunder. The front yard, if it could be called that, was a sea of horses. Painted Mustangs, their breath steaming in the chill, their riders cloaked in furs and feathers. All eyes were on her. None spoke. None moved. One man stood forward. His mount was coal black, decorated in white chalk and red ochre. The man himself wore a wolf pelt across his shoulders and held no weapon, but the power he carried was unmistakable. His eyes met Mae's, and the weight of that gaze nearly buckled her knees. I am Grey Wolf, he said. Mae nodded, her voice catching. Your son, he was hurt. He came to my door. I saved him. Grey Wolf tilted his head. Why? Mae answered honestly. Because I've buried too many children to let another die, even when I didn't know. There was a long silence. Then he nodded. May I see him? Mae stepped aside. Wes gripped his revolver, but didn't lift it. Grey Wolf entered, ducking beneath the low threshold. His eyes swept the room, landing finally on Tiho. He crossed to the boy and knelt, placing his hand gently on his chest. Tiho stirred, his voice weak but clear. Father. Grey Wolf said something in Comanche, soft and low. Mae watched as the great chief, feared across half the frontier, leaned down and kissed his son's forehead. He lives, Grey Wolf said, rising. Because of you. Mae nodded. Yes. He turned to Wes. And this one. Wes met his eyes. I protect what she protects. Another silence. Heavy. Measured. Then Grey Wolf stepped outside again and raised his hand. The riders backed away, melting into the night like ghosts. We owe you peace, he said over his shoulder. For one night. Then they were gone, the hoofbeats fading like a retreating storm. Mae closed the door with shaking hands. Wes finally exhaled. You think that's the end of it? She asked. Wes looked out the window again. No, he said. It's only just begun. The quiet that followed was almost cruel. Mae sat by the hearth, her arms wrapped tight around herself, her mind still replaying the image of Grey Wolf's face, his calm, unreadable stare, the controlled power behind every motion. He hadn't threatened them. He hadn't needed to. Wes stood at the window, watching the last shadows vanish across the ridge. Tiho lay asleep still, his breathing steady but shallow. They'll be back, Mae said softly. Wes nodded without turning. Maybe not for blood, but not in peace either. Why give us the night? Wes finally looked away from the window and leaned his rifle against the wall. Out of respect, or obligation, maybe both. You saved a chief's son. That ain't something they forget. But it don't erase everything else. Mae's shoulders slumped. I wasn't trying to make peace between nations. I just didn't want to bury another child. Wes walked to the fire, stirred the embers, and added a log. Doesn't matter what you wanted. Out here, every act has a cost. Even kindness. The fire snapped, casting long, nervous shadows across the room. Mae leaned back and looked at Tiho. You think he'll recover? He's young, Wes said. They heal fast, but the wound's deep. Might be weeks before he walks again. Mae fell silent, but the weight in her voice lingered. Then we're not going anywhere. Wes sat across from her. Not unless we want to drag him through prairie fire and rifle barrels. Mae's eyes narrowed. You think the army will come? Wes nodded. Word always gets out. White folks don't take kindly to the idea of Comanche riding peaceful through homesteads. And if someone tells the wrong person what happened here, we'll hang beside the boy we tried to save. Wes didn't correct her. The fire burned low, but neither of them moved to tend it. The silence grew thick again. Then Mae whispered, I lost a child once. Wes looked up, surprised by the sudden confession. His name was Caleb, she said. Winter fever. He was 7. We were alone. My husband was out hunting. I tried everything. Boiled herbs, prayed, wrapped him in every quilt I owned. Didn't matter. Wes didn't speak. Mae looked down. That's why I took Tiho in. It wasn't heroism. It was guilt. Wes leaned forward slightly. That ain't guilt. That's grace. She blinked at him. What do you know about grace? Wes smiled faintly. Not much, but I know it doesn't ask permission. Outside, the wind shifted. It smelled of smoke. Wes stood instantly and crossed to the door. He opened it slowly, just a crack, and stepped out onto the porch. Mae followed him, rifle in hand. The sky over the far hills was painted in amber and black, a long line of smoke rising into the stars. Fire, Mae whispered. Could be lightning strike. Wes shook his head. That's not nature's fire. That's a message. Mae stared out into the night. Who's it for? Us, he said grimly. Or them. Doesn't matter. It means we're not the only ones who know a Comanche boys inside this cabin. They watched in silence as the fire lit the horizon, not close yet, but closing. Mae tightened her grip on the rifle. Then tomorrow we get ready. Wes nodded once. Tomorrow we choose a side, whether we like it or not. Dawn broke in bruises. The sun rose low and reluctant, hidden behind layers of cloud and lingering smoke. The land looked sick beneath it, ashen, scorched, and uncertain. Mae stood barefoot in the dust outside the cabin, a mug of cold coffee in her hand, her eyes locked on the distant ridge where the night's fire still smoldered. She hadn't slept. Inside, Tiho mumbled in his fever again, his voice rasping in a language she couldn't understand, but felt anyway. Something about it twisted around her ribs like guilt with teeth. Wes was already moving, saddling his horse, loading bullets into the Winchester like someone folding prayers between pages of a Bible. How long before someone rides out here? Mae asked without turning. If we're lucky, 2 days, Wes said. If not, they're already watching. Mae exhaled through her nose. We should send word. Someone needs to know what really happened here, before someone else tells it wrong. Someone already is, Wes said, cinching his saddle tight. You think Grey Wolf's warriors rode quiet last night because they had to? They wanted to be seen. Mae blinked. What? They wanted someone to tell the story, Wes said. To ride into town and whisper that Mae Harland took in a Comanche boy. That a white woman opened her door to the enemy. Mae felt her stomach sink. You think this was a setup? No, he said. I think it was a warning. She didn't speak for a long time. Then, you still planning to leave when this is over? Wes looked at her across the yard. The wind tossed his coat behind him like a shadow trying to break free. I don't know, he admitted. Never stayed in one place long enough to decide if it was worth it. Mae nodded. Well, this place ain't much, but it's been worth enough to bury 5 generations in. Wes gave her a look. That's supposed to convince me to stay. No, Mae said. It's supposed to remind you what you're protecting. They stood in silence, the sound of crackling grass and the low groan of timber filling the space between them. Then, the faint clatter of hooves on hard earth. Mae turned sharply. Wes was already raising his rifle. One rider. Dust trailed behind him like smoke from a broken engine. He wore a soldier's jacket but rode like scout, fast, light, eyes scanning everything. His horse was lathered in sweat by the time he reached the edge of the clearing. Wes didn't lower the rifle. You lost. The rider dismounted quickly, hands raised, no weapon in sight. Name's Ellis Broom. I ride out of Fort Dunning. They sent me ahead. Something about Comanche near homesteads. Mae stepped forward. There was no raid. The boy's wounded. I helped him. Ellis glanced between the two, clearly unsure who was in charge. I'm not here to arrest anyone, he said cautiously. But the fort's restless. Rumors flying. They say Grey Wolf's moving east. They say he's after blood. Wes muttered, they always say that. Never wonder what he's running from. Ellis looked uncomfortable. All I know is there's talk of burning out homesteads. Yours came up. I rode fast to warn you. Mae's voice dropped. Who sent the order? Major Carson. Wants to send a message, he said. Mae and Wes exchanged a glance. Ellis added, if you run now, maybe you get out before the fire does. Mae crossed her arms. I'm not leaving my land. Then prepare to fight for it, Ellis said grimly. Or prepare to watch it burn. Inside the cabin, Tiho stirred again. Mae turned instinctively. Ellis followed her gaze, confused. "Is that him?" Mae nodded. "His name is Tio." Ellis took a step closer, something shifting in his face. Not fear, not hatred, just something like memory, recognition. "He's just a kid," he said quietly. "Yes," Mae said. "And you saw how many men want him dead just for surviving." Ellis looked down, then nodded. "I'll stall them, but I can't stop what's coming." Wes gripped the rifle tighter. "Neither can we, but we can damn well meet it standing up." The next 24 hours passed like thunder without rain, heavy, tense, and close enough to burn the skin. Wes spent the day reinforcing the cabin. He dragged logs from the shed and stacked them against the outer walls, cut new firing slits into the west-facing side, and double-checked the latches on every window. He moved like a man preparing for a siege, not because he expected to win, but because he refused to go quietly. Mae cooked stew with the last of the dried venison, even though none of them had much appetite. She moved stiffly, her hands sore from gripping tools and rifles, her mind tangled in thoughts of Tio, and of a life that used to be simpler, even if it had never truly been safe. Inside, Tio woke more often now. His fever was still high, but he'd stopped thrashing. Mae wiped his brow every hour with cool cloths, whispering the same soothing words she once used on Caleb, though Tio could barely understand her. At one point, his cracked voice croaked, "Where, Mother?" Mae's hand froze mid-wipe. "I don't know," she said softly, "but your father came." Tio's eyes fluttered open. He stared at the ceiling. "He lives." Mae nodded. "And he knows you do too." He closed his eyes again, and for a moment there was peace on his young face. A flicker of something sacred, even in all the ruin. That night, the air went still again. Mae and Wes sat on the porch, rifles across their laps. The stars were out, but dim, as if the sky knew it was wrong to shine on a place so close to fire. Ellis Broom hadn't returned. That worried Wes more than anything. "They'll come before dawn," he said. "That's how soldiers do it. Catch you when your blood runs slow and your hope is soft." Mae said nothing for a long while. Then, "You ever killed a man in cold blood?" Wes answered without pause. "Yes." Mae looked over at him. "You regret it?" "No," he said quietly, "but I remember it. Every day." Mae stared out at the horizon. "I don't want to shoot anyone, but I will. And I'll remember it too." Wes glanced sideways. "You always this steady?" She gave a ghost of a smile. "No, but I've been scared too long to keep shaking." They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Mae stood. "I'm going to lay down for an hour. Wake me if the wind shifts." Wes nodded. She turned at the door. "You?" "I don't sleep," he said simply. Mae paused, then walked inside. Alone on the porch, Wes sat with the rifle across his knees, eyes trained on the tree lean. He thought of the war, of fires set in the name of peace, of men who screamed for their country while shooting strangers in the dark. He thought of gray wolf's eyes, and then he heard it. Not hooves, not yet, but breath. The breath of men crouched in grass, waiting. The breath came like a warning from the soil itself. Wes didn't move, not yet. He sat with the rifle laid across his lap, eyes steady on the shadows stretching at the edge of the field. They were out there. He couldn't see them, but he didn't have to. Years of riding through war-torn valleys and ambush trails had trained him to hear the shape of danger. And this was it. Coiled, watching, waiting. Inside, the cabin was still. Mae had fallen into a shallow sleep on the floor near the hearth, one hand loosely wrapped around a pistol. The fire had dimmed to embers, casting the room in a low red light like the breath of a dying forge. Tio muttered in his sleep, voice dry and thin. Wes reached slowly into his coat, pulled out a thin strip of cloth, and tied it around his trigger hand, tight enough to cut off tremors, loose enough to move when it had to. It was something he did before every fight, a habit from darker years. The wind stirred again. From the south. Wrong direction. The smoke was back. Faint. Foul. Carried from a campfire, not meant to warm anyone, but to mark territory. And then, a single voice rang out. "Mae Harland, you are harboring an enemy of the state." Wes stood instantly. The voice was deep, commanding, and too rehearsed. It wasn't a warning, it was theater. The kind of line barked by a man with a uniform on his back and fear in his holster. Mae bolted upright inside. She scrambled to the window, the barrel of her pistol shaking slightly before she steadied it. "Is it the army?" she called. "No flags," Wes replied. But uniforms, yes. Probably militia. Carson's boys. Another voice shouted, closer this time. Step outside unarmed. You'll be given one chance. Mae opened the door just enough to speak. There's a wounded child inside. He's no threat to anyone. He needs rest and medicine, not bullets. A long silence followed. Then, all hostiles are a threat. Step away from the house. Wes stepped into the doorway, rifle in hand, and raised his voice. You fire on this cabin, you'll be starting a war you won't finish. There was movement in the brush, 10, maybe 12 figures. They'd surrounded the yard, hidden in thickets and behind low rise. Wes could make out the glint of metal, the gleam of cocked hammers and nervous fingers. We don't want trouble, the voice called again, though it was already too late for that. Mae's eyes flicked to Wes. You still think this was just about Tio? Wes answered through gritted teeth. No, it's about what he represents. And what's that? Wes lowered his voice. Proof that peace was possible. Mae's eyes narrowed. From the tree line, a shot cracked. Loud. Sudden. The bullet hit the porch rail just inches from Wes's boot, splintering wood. Mae didn't hesitate. She fired back. The report echoed through the prairie like a slap across God's face. And just like that, the first shot of the battle was fired. Not by an army, not by a chief, but by a woman with calloused hands and too many graves behind her. Wes fired twice into the bushes, ducking as more bullets screamed past. Inside, Tio cried out, startled awake. Mae rushed to him, pressing him flat. Stay down. Don't move. Wes kicked the door shut behind him and dropped to one knee near the window. They'll come at us in waves, he growled. They want this fast. Public. Mae loaded a fresh round into her pistol. Then we give them something to remember. The walls shook under the weight of gunfire. Bullets thudded into the cabin's siding, ripping chips of pine and flinging dust into the air. The table flipped. The window shattered. Mae ducked behind the hearthstone, pulling Tio's blanket higher over his chest as she shielded him with her own body. Wes returned fire through the slats in the shutter, one shot at a time, calm as a preacher quoting scripture. He didn't waste bullets. Every pull of the trigger was deliberate, deadly. They're not rushing, he called over the noise. They're testing us. Mae glanced toward the window. Then maybe we should test them back. She reached for her second pistol under the bed frame and loaded it with shaking fingers. Wes glanced at her from the side. You ever shot someone before? She didn't answer at first. Then, no. He nodded. Don't aim to kill, aim to stop. Knees. Shoulders. Let God do the deciding. Mae exhaled sharply. I stopped leaving things to God a long time ago. Outside, boots crunched across dry dirt. 3 shadows emerged, one to the left, 2 flanking the far side of the house. One carried a torch. Wes growled, they're trying to burn us out. Mae rose to her knees, took aim, and fired. The torch dropped. The man stumbled, clutched his thigh, and fell screaming. The other 2 bolted for cover. Tio whimpered behind them. Mae turned to him, saw the fear in his sweat-slicked face. She dropped to his side, grasped his hand. You're not alone, she whispered. Not anymore. He stared up at her, dazed, then rasped one word. Run? Mae shook her head. No, not this time. Outside, the gunfire paused. The kind of pause that feels too quiet, like the world's just sucked in breath and doesn't know how to let go. Wes peeked through a hole in the shutter. They're regrouping, he muttered. Waiting on someone. Or something. Then, from the east, the sound of hooves. Fast. A rider. Wes stood instantly, aimed out the back window. But he didn't shoot. It's Ellis, he said. Mae looked up, stunned. What? He's alone, Wes added. And he's yelling something. Mae rushed to the door, cracked it just enough to hear Ellis's voice cutting across the wind. Stand down. Major Carson's orders have been suspended. The men surrounding the house didn't react. Ellis rode into the clearing like a man with fire at his heels, waving a folded paper in his hand. Orders came down from Fort Clay this morning. Grey Wolf and his band are under protection. You fire again, and you're in violation of federal law. No one moved. Wes cursed under his breath. They won't believe him. Mae stepped onto the porch, raising both hands. They're lying, someone shouted from the trees. They're hiding that savage in there. Wes shouted back, that savage is a 10-year-old boy with a bullet in his leg. Another shot rang out. Missed high. Mae didn't flinch. Then come see for yourselves, she shouted. Come inside and look that boy in the eyes before you decide whether to hang him." There was a pause. A long, heavy, impossible pause. Then a single figure stepped forward, rifle lowered. Ellis. He dismounted slowly, hands still raised, eyes scanning the trees. "Don't be cowards," he said louder now. "You want justice. Start by facing the people you call enemies." Behind him, more riders appeared, officers, not militia. The insignia of Fort Clay visible in the early light. Ellis wasn't bluffing. Mae's knees nearly buckled. Wes lowered his rifle with a slow exhale. The siege broke like a wave losing its shape. One by one, the surrounding shapes in the brush melted away, some dropping rifles, some cursing under their breath, most not looking back. Ellis approached the porch, his voice quieter now. "You're clear. For now. But the tide's turned, Mae. You've just drawn a line between this land and everything around it." Mae looked down at her shaking hands, then at the boy inside, who watched it all with wide, blinking eyes. "I didn't draw it," she said. "I just stopped pretending it wasn't there." The sun hung low in the sky, swollen and bruised, casting long golden lines across a land that felt older now, like it had aged in the course a single morning. Mae sat on the porch steps, her back against the wall, Tiho resting in her lap. His fever had broken sometime after the last gunshot faded. Now his eyes fluttered gently in a restless sleep, but the tension in his limbs had eased. Wes leaned against a porch post, arms crossed, watching the smoke curl from where the last of the militia fires had died out. Ellis stood a few yards away, speaking quietly with two of the Fort Clay officers who'd arrived just in time to stop a bloodbath. Their horses shifted restlessly in the dry earth, sensing the unease that still clung to the air. Mae didn't speak until Ellis stepped onto the porch again. "You said they were under protection," she said. "Gray Wolf and his band. Since when?" Ellis hesitated, then sat across from her, on the top step. "Since yesterday. Word came through from Washington. New treaty. Quiet rushed. Political theater mostly. They're trying to avoid another massacre." Mae let out a bitter breath. "So we almost died for something they already signed into law." Wes grunted. "That's the West. The law always shows up 3 days late and 2 bodies too short." Ellis looked at them both, his face weathered. "But what you did here, it matters. The boy, Tiho, he's proof that not every white homestead has to be a coffin for Comanche blood, and I intend to report exactly that." Mae narrowed her eyes. "And if they don't believe you?" "Then I'll make them," Ellis said. "I swore an oath once to protect people, not just flags. You reminded me of that." Wes raised an eyebrow. "And the others? Carson? The men who pulled triggers today?" Ellis's jaw tightened. "They'll be dealt with. Some already are. Orders were clear. They disobeyed them." Mae stood carefully, shifting Tiho's weight to her shoulder. The boy stirred, groaning softly. She looked down at him, then back at Ellis. "He can't stay here. Not like this." Ellis nodded. "I know. We'll send riders to Gray Wolf. Let them know where he is. I have no doubt his people are already near, watching." Wes stepped down off the porch and faced the open land beyond. "So what now?" Ellis looked at him. "Now you choose. You can stay here, live quiet again, or leave before this land becomes a symbol for both sides." Mae shook her head. "It already is." The wind picked up again, hot and dry. It whispered through the fence posts and carried dust into the folds of Mae's dress. She looked at Wes. "You still planning to keep riding?" Wes met her eyes. "Depends." "On what?" "On whether this place needs someone who knows how to shoot straight when peace gets too quiet." Mae smiled just a little. "Then I guess you're staying." Ellis rose, adjusted his hat. "I'll return in 2 days with men to escort the boy. Until then, you're safe. I promise." "No," Mae said, turning toward the cabin. "We're not safe, but we're standing." She stepped inside, carrying Tiho back to the bed with a mother's steady rhythm. Wes followed, pausing just long enough to glance at the horizon one more time. It was empty now, but the kind of empty that meant watching. The next morning dawned too still. No birds, no breeze, the kind of silence that made Mae's skin itch, like the earth was holding its breath again. The fire in the hearth had burned low through the night, but no one had bothered to stoke it. There had been sleep, but it came in fractured pieces, caught between nightmares and memories. Wes was already outside, sitting in the dirt with a whetstone in hand, slowly drawing it along the edge of his knife. The motion was steady, not urgent, just necessary. Nearby, Mae hauled water from the well, her sleeves rolled, her braid undone, strands clinging to her neck in the heat. Inside, Tiho sat upright for the first time. His legs were weak and wrapped in fresh cloth, but he could sit, and his eyes, though tired, were clear now. Sharp. Watching. Mae returned to find him like that, propped against the wall beside the cot, clutching a cup of water in both hands. She froze, surprised. "You're awake," she said, stepping closer. He nodded once. "Pain." He lifted one shoulder, a halfway gesture that said, "Yes, but doesn't matter." She crouched next to him. "Your father, he'll come for you." Tiho looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, "He's already near." Mae's brows furrowed. "You can feel that." He nodded again, this time more certainly. Mae reached for a small jar of salve on the shelf. "Good. Then maybe you'll be gone before anyone else gets the idea to finish what those men started." Tiho studied her. Then, in slow, broken English, he said, "You did not run." Mae paused mid-reach. The words hit her harder than any rifle round. "No," she said quietly. "I didn't." He gave the faintest smile. "Most do." Mae swallowed. "I almost did. But your eyes, they look like my boy's. He died. Fever." Tiho didn't speak again. He didn't have to. She sat beside him for a long while, neither saying anything, letting the cabin breathe around them. Outside, Wes stood suddenly. He could feel it too. Dust on the horizon. But not soldiers. These riders were silent, graceful, painted. By mid-morning, a line of Comanche appeared on the ridge, framed by the sun behind them. There were no war cries, no weapons drawn, just slow, steady movement. Wolves carved into leather, feathers braided through hair, beads glinting beneath bone-colored sun. At their center rode Gray Wolf. He dismounted the moment he saw the cabin. Mae stepped out to meet him. No rifle, no hat, just hands calloused by years of loss and one night of resolve. Gray Wolf approached without pause, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "My son," he asked. Mae turned slightly, nodding toward the open door. Gray Wolf stepped inside alone. Tiho was sitting up straighter now. His eyes lit the moment he saw his father. The war chief knelt beside the boy and cupped his face in both hands. They spoke in low, private tones, words meant for no other ears. Mae turned away, giving them space. Wes approached quietly, stopping beside her. "You did it," he said. "No," Mae whispered. "We did it." They stood there until Gray Wolf emerged again, Tiho leaning into him as he walked. He paused on the porch, looking at Mae. "You risked your life for him. For me." "I didn't do it for you," she said honestly. "I did it because the world has too many graves and not enough second chances." He studied her, then nodded slowly. "You carry your sorrow well." Mae's jaw clenched. "So do you." Gray Wolf adjusted his son gently in the saddle. Then he looked to Wes. "The next storm may not bring mercy. You know that." "I do," Wes said. "But I'm not leaving." Gray Wolf gave a final nod. Then he turned and rode. No farewell. No ceremony. Just dust and distance. That night the wind changed again, cooler this time, coming from the north. Mae sat by the hearth, a letter in her lap she didn't know how to finish. A thank you that wouldn't be mailed. A story she wasn't sure she'd ever tell aloud. Wes came in from outside, quiet as always. "You think he'll remember us?" she asked. Wes sat beside her, boots crossed at the ankle. "You don't forget the people who keep you alive. You carry them forever." Mae looked at the fire. "I think," she whispered, "that boy might have saved us more than we saved him." Wes nodded once. And for the first time in weeks, the silence between them wasn't waiting for danger. It was just peace, hard-earned, and still burning. The days that followed were strange and quiet, like the land itself didn't know whether to breathe easy or brace for another storm. Mae kept the cabin busy, mending fences, patching bullet holes, baking bread she didn't eat. Her hands moved constantly, but her eyes kept drifting to the trail that led westward, where Tiho and his father had vanished days ago. Every morning, she woke expecting to see riders on the ridge. None came. Wes, for his part, didn't speak much. He'd taken to rebuilding the barn door, whittling a new brace beam from a fallen pine. It gave his muscles something to focus on, but Mae noticed the way his jaw tensed when he thought she wasn't looking. He wasn't a man used to staying still. He wasn't sure if he wanted to be. On the third morning, a letter arrived. No knock. Just the folded paper tucked under a stone on the porch. It was from Ellis. Mae read it aloud while Wes leaned in the doorway, arms crossed. Mae, the official word from Fort Clay is that you were never under threat. That the confrontation was a misunderstanding now settled. That's the story being passed around the towns. Unofficially, you've made enemies. Quiet ones. The kind who don't forget humiliation, especially when it comes from a woman with grit in her bones and a rifle on her porch. Gray Wolf sent word. Tiho walks again. He asked about you. That's something, Mae. You gave him a new story to carry, and I think he'll pass it on. Wes, I know your type. You ride hard and alone and tell yourself it's the only way to stay clean. But if you've stayed this long, maybe it's time to ask what kind of life you're really riding toward. Be careful, but more than that, be honest. With her. With yourself. Ellis. Mae folded the letter, slid it into the drawer with the others, and didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Wes cleared his throat. He always write like that. Mae smirked faintly. Always. They fell into silence again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It felt like the kind of quiet that grows between two people who've survived something sacred. Later that afternoon, Wes took the horse out to check the river line, make sure the floodplain hadn't shifted. Mae watched him ride off, a strange ache curling in her chest. She didn't know if she wanted him to come back because she needed him, or because the idea of needing someone scared her less than it used to. When Wes returned, his face was tight. Mae met him in the yard, drying her hands on her apron. What is it? He dismounted, dust on his boots, jaw clenched. Tracks, he said. Wagon. 2 horses. Deep cuts. Eastbound. Settlers. Maybe, but they didn't pass the lower trail. Which means they're headed for the canyon. Wes nodded. Only reason to go there is to hide. Or hunt. Mae felt her breath catch. Tiho, she asked. Wes shrugged. Could be. Or someone trying to find him. Mae grabbed her rifle. Then we're not waiting to find out. They rode fast, shadows long and stretched by the sinking sun. The trail grew narrow, carved deep into red clay. The river snaked far below them, cold and wide. When they reached the overlook, Mae pulled the reins and froze. Down in the basin below, near the bend in the river, was a campfire. 3 wagons, 6 riders. 1 tethered horse that bore Comanche paint, though half of it had been scrubbed off. Wes raised the spyglass, handed it to her. Mae's stomach turned. The horse was Gray Wolf's, but neither he nor Tiho were visible. We go down there, Wes said. We better be sure. Mae didn't hesitate. We go, she said, because I've buried 1 boy. I won't bury another. Wes nodded once, slow and final. Then he drew his rifle, and together they started down into the canyon. The canyon swallowed sound like a grave. Mae's horse moved slow, careful over the rocky descent, hooves kicking loose gravel that tumbled into silence. Wes rode just behind her, rifle across his chest, eyes never leaving the glow of the fire ahead. The sky above had turned to charcoal, bruised with the last gasps of sunset, and the smoke from the camp below drifted upward in slow, heavy spirals, too still to be accidental. Halfway down the ridge, they dismounted and tied the horses behind a scrub of mesquite. We walk from here, Wes said. Mae nodded and checked her revolver. Her heart thudded in her throat, not from fear exactly, but from a terrible knowing. The same feeling she'd had the night Caleb died. When she sensed the weight of something, she couldn't stop. They crept low across the flats, staying behind the rocks. The fire burned in the clearing just ahead, too large for warmth, too open for comfort. These weren't travelers. This was a trap meant to be seen. Then she heard it. A cough. Low. Raspy. Familiar. Mae grabbed Wes's arm. Tiho. They slipped closer, crouched behind a fallen cottonwood log. Now they could see them clearly, 6 men, rough in dress but not drifters. 2 wore military coats with the buttons removed, another had a Comanche braid hung from his belt like a trophy. A 4th man stood apart, arms crossed, wearing a wide black hat and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. And near the fire, tied to a post with a cut lip and bruised temple, Tiho. Mae's body surged with heat. Wes whispered, "They're waiting for someone." "Who?" she hissed. "Us." And then the man in the black hat turned toward the shadows and spoke. "No need to sneak anymore. We've been expecting you." Mae froze. The man stepped forward, calm as a vulture with a full belly. "Mae Harland," he said smoothly. "Word travels far about a woman who defends red blood over her own." Wes raised his rifle. "Let the boy go." The man didn't flinch. "He'll go, one way or another." Mae stepped out from cover, gun raised. "You don't want this fight." "Oh, but I do," the man said. "Because your kindness made a fool of Major Carson. Because that boy is proof of something the people I ride for won't tolerate." "Which is?" Mae asked. He sneered. "Hope." Wes fired first. The man spun back with a cry as the bullet grazed his shoulder, throwing him to the dirt. Then chaos. The camp erupted in gunfire, men shouting, scrambling. One dove for cover. Another raised his rifle but fell before he could aim, Mae's shot tearing through his chest. Wes rushed left, flanking the fire. Mae moved straight for Tio, her revolver hot in her grip. Bullets whined past her, one tearing her sleeve open. She didn't stop. A man lunged from behind the wagon, blade in hand. Mae turned and fired. Too late. The blade caught her side. Shallow, but deep enough to burn. She gritted her teeth, dropped him with a second shot, and fell to her knees beside Tio. He looked up at her, dazed but conscious. "You came," he whispered. "Always," she said, voice shaking. She cut his bonds. Behind her, Wes let out a yell, then silence. Two bodies dropped. Then footsteps. Mae turned, raising her pistol, but it was Wes. Bleeding from the scalp, but alive. "All clear," he rasped. They didn't wait. Mae pulled Tio to his feet. He staggered but walked. Wes grabbed their rifles, and together they fled the campfire's glow, the canyon swallowing them once more. Behind them, the fire sputtered. The man in black was gone. Vanished. But his words remained. This wasn't over. They didn't stop until the canyon walls gave way to open prairie. The moon cast a pale path ahead, and the river whispered beside them, low and steady like an old story being retold. Tio leaned heavily on Mae, every step a battle. Wes led the way, scanning the shadows for pursuit, but none came. Not yet. When they finally reached the shelter of a rocky outcrop near the riverbank, Mae dropped to her knees, breath ragged. Her side was soaked, warm and sticky. She pulled her shirt aside and hissed. "Knife caught you bad?" Wes asked, crouching beside her. "Just a scratch," she lied. He didn't argue. He just pulled a canteen from his saddlebag and poured water over the wound, then tore a clean strip from his shirt and pressed it to her skin. Mae winced, teeth clenched, but she didn't pull away. "Tio?" Wes asked, glancing at the boy. The child sat propped against a stone, blinking slowly. He wasn't speaking now, shock settling in like frost. Mae crawled toward him and took his face in her hands. "Hey," she whispered. "You're safe. You hear me? Safe." His lips moved. "Not safe," he said. "They come again." Mae glanced at Wes. He's right. That man, the one in the black hat, he wasn't just some drifter. Wes nodded. He wasn't militia either. You saw his eyes. Cold. Trained. I'd bet silver he rode for someone bigger. Someone who didn't like how that treaty with Grey Wolf played out. Mae's voice was hoarse. "They're trying to start something." Wes sat back, staring into the darkness. Or finish it. They rested there until the first hints of dawn stained the sky. Mae could barely keep her eyes open. Tio finally drifted off, his head on her lap. Wes didn't sleep. He kept his back to the fire and his rifle across his knees. As light crept over the grass, a familiar sound returned, the wind. Cool and dry, but not empty. Hoofbeats, not galloping, steady. Intentional. Mae tensed, hand drifting toward her pistol. Wes stood, lifting his rifle halfway, ready but not raised. Then the riders appeared, 3 of them, dressed in ochre and leather. Faces painted in ash. One held a spear. The other 2 had bows strapped across their backs. Mae exhaled sharply. Comanche. And at the front, Grey Wolf. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped. Mae stood unsteadily, helping Tio up beside her. The boy's face broke into a tired, crooked smile the moment he saw his father. Grey Wolf stepped forward and knelt beside his son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You found him," he said without looking up. Mae nodded. "We almost didn't." Wes stepped beside her. There were others. Soldiers or something like it. Paid men. They had his horse. They wanted him dead. Grey Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Their death will carry meaning." "No," Mae said quickly. "Don't retaliate. That's what they want. Another reason to rip the treaty apart. Gray Wolf stood slowly. You think peace comes from silence? No, Mae said. I think it comes from survival. And you've done enough of that to know. Sometimes not fighting is the bravest thing. The Comanche chief stared at her. A long, searching silence. Then he nodded once. He's your son now, too, he said softly. Mae's throat tightened. Gray Wolf turned to Wes. And you walk the edge of two paths. You will have to choose. Wes didn't flinch. Already did. The wind shifted again. This time, it carried no scent of smoke. Just prairie and dust, and the promise of something not yet broken. Gray Wolf mounted and lifted Tiho into the saddle beside him. He will return when the land is safe, he said. Mae blinked. You mean here? Gray Wolf gave the faintest smile. He has family here. Then he turned and rode. Mae stood there long after they'd vanished into the horizon. Her shirt torn, her hands bloodied, her eyes raw, but something inside her felt steadier than it had in years. Wes came to stand beside her. Well, he said, that was one hell of a week. Mae chuckled weakly. You sticking around? He looked at her long and level. Yeah, he said, I think I am. A week passed. Then two. The prairie, scorched and haunted only days ago, slowly began to breathe again. Birds returned to the trees near the cabin. The wind carried more dust than smoke now. The kind of silence that lingered wasn't the silence of dread. It was the silence of people trying to believe in normal again. Mae didn't talk much about what had happened. Neither did Wes. They worked, repaired, cooked. Sometimes they sat on the porch in the evenings and didn't say a word for hours. And somehow that was enough. But peace, Mae had learned, didn't arrive without scars. And it never stayed without cost. One morning, Wes found a mark carved into the fence post near the eastern trail. Subtle, shallow, almost invisible to the untrained eye. An upside-down horseshoe. He scraped it clean with his knife and didn't tell Mae. Later that same day, she found a bullet wedged in the outer wall of the barn. A clean one, not rusted, planted like a tooth. They both knew what it meant. Not everyone had forgotten. That evening, as the sun died behind a bruised ridge, Mae stood by the riverbank, watching the sky bleed into the water. Wes joined her without a word. You feel it too? She asked. He nodded. Yeah. Eyes. Somewhere. Mae crossed her arms. They think if they scare us enough, we'll disappear. Wes leaned against the tree. They think if they remind us what we aren't, we'll forget what we are. Mae looked at him. You're not just passing through anymore, are you? Wes shook his head slowly. Never was. Just didn't know it. A bird took off from the reeds nearby. Startled. Not by them. Wes was already moving. Back to the house. Now. They reached the porch in a run. Mae grabbed the rifle from behind the door. Wes loaded the Winchester. No words. No panic. Just instinct. But when the shots came, they didn't come from the brush. They came from the ridge. Farther out. Long range. Careful. Deliberate. The first bullet hit the fence. The second shattered the rain barrel. The third struck the top of the porch post, showering Mae in splinters. She ducked and rolled inside. Wes was already at the window, squinting through the crack between shutters. 2 shooters. Maybe more. Scoped rifles. Not militia. Mae kept low. Who the hell are they? Wes's jaw tightened. The kind that don't wear uniforms. Mercenaries. Paid to send a message. They want us out. They want us erased. Another shot cracked through the wall, embedding in the table leg. Mae reached for her revolver. Then let's send our own message. Wes fired through the window, twice. Fast. Controlled. Then ducked. No return fire. The shooters weren't wasting bullets. Mae, he said slowly, we're not winning this by holding out. Then what? She asked, crawling to the other window. We flank. One of us draws fire. The other circles wide. Mae gave him a hard look. You planning on volunteering me for that? Wes offered the faintest smile. You're a better shot. She shook her head. You're the better liar. He gave a short nod. Fair enough. She hesitated, then grabbed his arm. If I don't make it. You will, he cut in. But if I don't, I'll make sure they don't leave this land alive. She stared at him, then nodded once. The plan was silent, simple, deadly. At twilight's edge, Mae burst from a front door, firing 2 shots into the ridge, wild but loud. The snipers took the bait. Wes slipped out the back. through brush, over roots, breath tight. He climbed the slope low and slow, circling wide behind the shooters. As he crested the ridge, he saw them, 2 men, both prone, scopes fixed on the cabin. Focused, calm, too calm. He aimed, took the first shot. The man on the left dropped instantly. The second turned, too late. Wes fired again, clean through the neck. Silence. He lowered his rifle, heart pounding. From the tree line behind him, another voice spoke. That was impressive. Wes spun, rifle raised. But the man was already gone. No tracks. No name. Just words left behind like frost on a window. Next time we won't miss. The bodies were buried by moonlight. No word spoken. Just shovels. Dirt. Silence. Mae pressed the final stone into place with bleeding hands. Wes stood beside her, bruised and quiet, staring down at the men who had ridden into their lives with death on their tongues and iron in their hands. What now? She asked finally. Wes looked toward the horizon. We brace. We build. And we don't run. They didn't talk about the third voice, the man in the trees who vanished like smoke. But they both felt him, still out there watching. Measuring. Back at the cabin, Mae sat by the fire. The room smelled of ash and oil and blood, but it also smelled of bread again. Fresh bread. She baked a loaf that morning, as if the act itself could hold the walls together. Wes entered quietly, dropped his rifle by the door. They won't stop, he said. No, she agreed. But neither will we. Mae met his gaze. That's the difference. They fight because they fear what's coming. We fight because we believe it's worth reaching. He gave a small, tired smile. You think Tiho's safe? He is now, she said. And if he ever rides back here, I want him to find something worth remembering. Wes moved to the table and poured 2 cups of coffee, thick, black, and bitter. He handed one to her. They drank in silence. Outside, the wind blew hard again. But this time, it didn't sound like warning. It sounded like song. 1 year later, spring returned with green grass and full rivers. Mae walked the edge of the property line, a rifle over one shoulder and a satchel of seeds in the other. Children's laughter echoed in the distance. New families had moved in, inspired by stories, by bravery, by land defended not by force, but by choice. Wes had taken up work as a teacher of sorts, though no one called it that. He showed young men how to shoot straight, yes, but more often how not to shoot at all, how to listen, how to stand for something. And Tiho, he returned that summer, on horseback, taller, stronger, a scar on his leg, and wisdom in his eyes no child should carry. But he smiled when he saw Mae again, smiled wide and honest, and wrapped his arms around her like a son would. Gray Wolf came with him. They stayed for 3 days, built a fire in the same clearing where gunshots once split the air, shared stories, laughed, left behind no promises, only understanding. Some say the West was tamed by iron. Some say it was tamed by fear. But the truth? It was tamed by those who refused to forget their humanity, even when the world begged them to. Mae Harland never left that cabin. Wes never stopped standing at her side. And the boy they saved? He grew into a man who carried their names in his stories, told under stars his enemies never thought he'd live to see.